Elvis was the biggest star in America, but when that restaurant refused to serve his black bandmates, he made a decision that cost him everything: his fans, his sponsors, and nearly his career. What happened next made him more than just a singer. It was May 12, 1956, in Tupelo, Mississippi, the small town where Elvis was born. He had just finished a sold-out show at the Mississippi-Alabama Fair and Dairy Show, and he was hungry. Not just Elvis, his whole band was starving after 2 hours of non-stop performing. Elvis was traveling with 3 musicians who had become far more than just his band. Benny Parker, was a 32-year-old piano player from New Orleans who could make the keys sing in ways Elvis had never imagined. Marcus Green, 28, was a drummer whose rhythm felt like it came straight from heaven, and Samuel Wright, 35, was a bass player whose fingers flew across the strings so fast that other musicians would pause just to watch in awe. These 3 men had been playing with Elvis for 6 months. In that short time, they had become family. They had driven thousands of miles together, squeezed into the back of tour buses, sharing stories about their lives, their dreams, and their families back home. They stayed up until dawn in cheap motel rooms, creating music, harmonizing, and experimenting with sounds no one had heard before. They protected each other from angry crowds, celebrated birthdays, and mourned together when Marcus received word that his father had passed. Benny had taught Elvis about the blues, not just the notes, but the deep soul behind them, the pain and joy that made music move people to tears. Marcus had shown him rhythm patterns from New Orleans jazz clubs that most white musicians never knew existed. Samuel had introduced bass lines that made Elvis' hips sway in ways that sent teenage girls screaming and their parents into a panic. They weren't just bandmates, they were brothers. But this was 1956 in Mississippi, and no amount of talent, fame, or brotherhood could erase certain rules. Rosie's Diner was the best restaurant in Tupelo. Everyone knew Elvis had eaten there dozens of times as a kid, whenever his family could scrape together the money. He remembered the smell of fresh biscuits, the taste of their famous fried chicken, and how the owner's wife, Rosie, would slip him an extra piece of pie when no one was looking. "Come on, fellas," Elvis said as they pulled up to the familiar red and white building. "You haven't lived until you've tried Rosie's chicken. Best in Mississippi, I guarantee it." Benny, Marcus, and Samuel exchanged glances. They had been down this road before, literally and figuratively. They knew what was coming, but they didn't want to embarrass Elvis by spelling it out. "Elvis," Benny said carefully, "maybe we should find somewhere else. There's a place on the other side of town where—" "Nonsense," Elvis interrupted, already stepping out of the car. "I'm buying dinner for my band, and we're going to the best place in town. You guys deserve that." The moment they walked through the door, the entire restaurant fell silent. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. Every head turned to stare at the 4 men in the doorway. 1 white, 3 black. The waitress, a young woman named Susan, who couldn't have been more than 19, looked terrified. She recognized Elvis instantly. Everyone in Tupelo knew their hometown boy who had made it big. But her eyes darted between Elvis and his companions, then toward the kitchen, where the owner was surely watching. "Mr. Presley, I can't seat them. You understand, don't you? It's not me, it's just the rules."
Elvis's smile faded. Rules. From the kitchen, Harold Mitchell emerged, the owner of Rosie's Diner, a large man in his 50s wearing a white apron and an expression that said he wasn't backing down. Rosie had passed 2 years earlier, and Harold had run the place ever since. "Elvis," Harold said, his voice firm but not unkind, "you know how things work round here. You can stay, you're always welcome, but they—" he gestured toward Benny, Marcus, and Samuel. "They need to leave. We've got a colored section around back, or there are restaurants on the other side of town that cater to their kind." The restaurant was so quiet you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Every customer watched, waiting to see what Elvis Presley, the biggest star in America, would do. Elvis looked at Harold, then at his bandmates, then back at Harold. His jaw tightened, the way people close to him knew meant barely controlled anger. Benny placed a hand on Elvis's shoulder. "It's okay, Elvis. We'll wait outside. We're used to this." Those 4 words, "we're used to this," hit Elvis like a punch to the gut. Used to being treated as less than human, used to being turned away, used to eating meals standing in alleys while white folks sat inside, used to sleeping in cars when hotels refused them rooms, used to being told they weren't good enough, weren't welcome, weren't wanted. Elvis thought about all the times over the past 6 months when his bandmates had quietly vanished while he checked into hotels. All the times they'd said, "We'll grab something later," when he suggested restaurants. All the times they'd made excuses he'd been too naive or too privileged to question. They had been protecting him from the ugly truth, shielding him from the reality they faced every day. "They're kind?" Elvis repeated slowly, his voice tight with emotion. "These men are musicians, Harold, artists. They're my friends." "I don't make the rules, Elvis," Harold said, crossing his arms. "This is Mississippi. This is how things are. You want to eat here? You're welcome any time, but either they leave or you all do." What happened in the next 10 seconds would change everything. Elvis walked to the counter, picked up the phone meant for customers, and dialed a number while everyone watched. The call lasted exactly 47 seconds. Though he spoke quietly, those nearby caught fragments. "Yeah, it's me, Rosie's Diner, refusing service. I need you to make some calls." When he hung up, Elvis turned to face Harold and the entire restaurant. "I was born in this town," Elvis said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent diner. "I grew up 3 blocks from here. My mama used to bring me here when we had enough money, which wasn't often. Rosie used to give me extra pie because she knew we were struggling." He paused, making sure every person was listening. Rosie was kind. She saw people, not skin color. She would be ashamed of what this place has become.
Harold's face turned red. "Now you wait just a minute." "No," Elvis interrupted. "You wait. These 3 men, Benny, Marcus, and Samuel, they're the reason my music sounds the way it does. They're the reason I'm famous. They're the reason I can afford to eat anywhere I want. And if they're not good enough for this restaurant, then neither am I." Elvis turned to his band. "Gentlemen, let's go. We'll find somewhere that serves good food and good people." As they headed toward the door, Elvis turned back one last time. "And Harold, that phone call I just made, that was to every reporter I know. By tomorrow morning, everyone in America is going to know that Rosie's Diner refuses to serve the men who made Elvis Presley famous." They walked out, leaving behind a restaurant full of stunned customers and one very pale owner. As they reached the car, none of them spoke. The silence was thick with emotion. Marcus was shaking, whether from anger or something else, it was hard to say. Benny had tears in his eyes. Samuel kept glancing back at the diner as if he couldn't quite believe it. When they got to the car, Elvis leaned against it, breathing hard, his hands trembling slightly from the adrenaline. "You didn't have to do that," Benny said quietly. "Elvis, you didn't have to." "Yes, I did," Elvis interrupted, his voice firm despite the emotion. "I absolutely did. How can I stand on stage and sing music that came from your culture, from your people, from your pain and joy and soul? How can I do that and then let someone treat you like you're not even human?" He looked at each of them, his eyes blazing with conviction. "If I can't eat with you, I don't deserve to play with you. It's that simple." Samuel, who rarely spoke unless it mattered, stepped forward and embraced Elvis. Then Marcus joined, then Benny. The 4 of them stood there in the parking lot of Rosie's Diner, holding each other like brothers who had just survived a battle together.
because in a way they had. But Elvis wasn't done, not even close. The next morning, newspapers across the South ran the story. Elvis Presley walks out of hometown restaurant over segregation, the headlines read. Some papers praised him as a hero, others condemned him as a traitor to Southern values. Radio stations debated whether to keep playing his music. Advertisers began pulling sponsorships. Within a week, Elvis had lost 3 major deals worth over $100,000, a fortune in 1956. Radio stations in Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi announced boycotts of his songs. Angry letters flooded in by the thousands. Some fans burned his records in public protests. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, was furious. "You've just cost yourself a fortune," he told Elvis. Was it worth it? Elvis didn't hesitate. Yes. But what no one expected happened next. For every Southern sponsorship he lost, he gained 2 in the North. For every radio station that banned him below the Mason-Dixon line, 3 above it added him to heavy rotation. For every fan who burned a record, 5 new ones bought his music. The teenage girls who screamed for Elvis now saw him more than a handsome singer. They saw someone who stood for what was right. The black community, already fans of his music, embraced him as an ally. The younger generation across America, tired of their parents' segregation laws, made him their hero. Within a month, Elvis's record sales had tripled, not despite the controversy, but because of it. But the real change happened in Mississippi. Within 6 months of that walkout at Rosie's Diner, 23 restaurants in the South quietly dropped their policies. No announcements, no press conferences. They simply began seating customers regardless of color. They had seen what happened when you turned away Elvis Presley's friends, and they did the math. Harold Mitchell held out longer than most. Rosie's Diner kept its whites-only signs for another year, even as business plummeted. Customers stayed away. Sales dropped by 60%, then 70%, then 80%. In March 1957, Harold quietly removed the signs. No apology, no fanfare, just empty hooks where the racist notices once hung. But it was too late. The damage was irreversible, and Rosie's Diner closed 6 months later. Elvis never gloated publicly. When a reporter asked about the closure, he said, "I'm sad about it. Rosie was a good woman who made the best chicken in Mississippi. Her husband just forgot what she believed in."
As for Benny Parker, Marcus Green, and Samuel Wright, they stayed with Elvis for the next 2 years, on records and in concerts. Elvis ensured they were paid the same as his white musicians, stayed in the same hotels, and received the same respect. When Marcus's daughter was born in 1957, Elvis became her godfather. When Benny's house burned down in 1958, Elvis bought him a new one. When Samuel's son wanted college but couldn't afford it, Elvis covered all 4 years of tuition. These acts stayed private. Elvis never called reporters or sought praise. He simply took care of his friends, the way true friends do. Years later, in a 1968 interview, Benny Parker, then 44, still playing piano, was asked about that day at Rosie's Diner. "Elvis could have left us outside that restaurant," Benny said. "He could have eaten his chicken, said, 'Sorry, fellas,' and nobody would have blamed him. That was 1956. That was Mississippi. That was just how things were." He paused, eyes growing wet. But Elvis looked at Harold Mitchell and said, "If they're not good enough for this restaurant, then neither am I." That's when I knew I wasn't playing for Elvis Presley the singer. I was playing for Elvis Presley, the man. The story of what happened at Rosie's Diner spread far beyond Mississippi, beyond the South, beyond America. It became a symbol of using fame for something greater than fame itself. It showed that sometimes losing everything is the only way to gain what truly matters. Today, there's a historical marker where Rosie's Diner once stood. It reads, On this site stood Rosie's Diner, where, on May 12, 1956, Elvis Presley chose friendship over fame, equality over ease, and integrity over income. His walkout sparked a quiet revolution in Southern dining and reminded a nation that change begins when one person says, "Not anymore." Elvis Presley walked into that restaurant as the biggest star in America. He walked out as something more, a man who proved that fame means nothing if you don't use it to stand up for what's right. He lost sponsorships, he lost radio play, he lost fans, but he gained something worth infinitely more. He gained his humanity, his integrity, and the respect of people who understood that true greatness isn't measured in record sales or sold-out shows. It's measured in the moments when you have to choose between comfort and courage, between acceptance and action, between staying silent and speaking up. Elvis chose courage. He chose action. He chose to speak up. And in doing so, he didn't just change 23 restaurants in the South, he changed what it meant to be famous in America. If this story of courage and friendship moved you, make sure to subscribe and share this video. Hit that thumbs up to support more stories about the humanity behind the legends. Have you ever stood up for someone when everyone else stayed silent? Let us know in the comments and ring that notification bell for more incredible true stories about music's greatest heroes.